It's Thursday, 11 o'clock. It's time for this week's Watch Drop. So we're lucky that we get a lot of very cool watches going through the site here at Subdial. But this week is one of those drops that's just going to take your breath away. It certainly has for me. We have 75 watches hitting the site and nearly £1 million in value. So I've cherry-picked just a few that I'm going to run through with you, some of my all-time favorites actually. And we're going to start with Patek Philippe. First up, the 3940J. I'd argue that this is probably the best everyday wearer watch you could possibly choose. It's a model that was introduced first in 1985. It's a perpetual calendar, 36mm by 8.5mm thick. It's a 3-register perpetual calendar. It harks back to a lot of history from Patek, particularly in yellow gold. This feels like that traditional Patek Philippe that you would want to keep in your collection for all time. So why do I think that this is one of the best daily wearers you can get? Well, firstly, it's comfortable. Secondly, it's iconic. Thirdly, it's something that will constantly tell you the right time, regardless of leap years, shorter months, etc. The moon phase on this watch just pops and contrasts against the yellow gold. But primarily, I just think it's such a great example of what we know as the best watchmaker there's ever been. And so there's always something to look at when it's on your wrist, and there's always something to talk about when you're discussing it over the dinner table or with friends. It's a really, really special watch, and I'm glad to see that it's getting a lot of limelight these days. Moving on. If you were to ask most collectors what their favourite luxury sports watch is, I'd argue that the 5711 in steel would probably come top of most people's lists, myself included. It is the quintessential Genta design. The 5711 Nautilus is one of those watches that was extremely hyped only a couple of years ago. And now that hype has somewhat died away, and you're presented with an opportunity to either buy 2024 Cubitus for similar money. I'd argue that now is the time to buy, I think, the iconic steel sports watch from Patek, and especially one in this condition. Really, really stunning watch. Sticking with the luxury steel watches from Patek, I have to talk about this Aquanaut 5164A. Over the last few weeks, we've talked about luxury sports watches that you could wear to play tennis and swim in and do whatever you want, not worry about damaging the movements. We've talked about FP Journe Elegant, we've talked about the FP Journe Indy 500, and I think the Aquanaut 5164A is Patek's equivalent. What I like about it is that you've got this really robust design. It's comfortable and light in steel. It's waterproof, of course, Aquanaut. It comes on a rubber strap, so there's nothing you can do to wear through this thing. It'll go for years and years. But it has, particularly the 64 reference, has got that really cool movement, which has got that travel time complication in it. So with a quick glance, you can see what time it is back home if you're calling your wife or your kids or whomever, but you still know what time zone you're in the current. I love that. It's a really simple but really useful complication. And when you've got a watch that's so robust, you can wear it in the pool, you can wear it surfing or snorkeling or whatever you're going to. I'd play tennis in it. That's a top pick. It really is. Next up, dress watches, and very, very haute horlogerie. This is a Calatrava 5077, but not just any Calatrava. This is a rare Handcrafts with a particularly detailed and ornate cloisonné enamel with a picture of a Namibian leopard. And it's one of those watches that I think if I saw it online, I'd sort of move on past it. Impressive, of course, but it's not really me. But then I saw it in person, and I'm absolutely captivated. I don't quite understand how, let alone someone can draw a picture this detailed with as much colour and vibrancy, but to do that in a cloisonné enamel, in a tiny little picture frame, it's so impressive. I completely adore it. I would rock that. It's absolutely stunning. Even the diamonds just set it off. It sort of creates that picture frame that you sort of look in and you're sort of brought into that sort of world that Anita Porcher and her team have produced. It is absolutely every bit as sort of high haute horlogerie as Patek gets. And I love the fact that it's got the 240Q movement in the back, which is actually the same as the 1985 3940, just brought forward a couple of generations. It's iconic Patek, and I'd love one. I might not wear it all that often, but I would love to have it in my collection. Now, moving on to Rolex. There are a couple of vintage Rolex sports watches here that are probably in my top 5 of all time. First, the 1680 Red. When you get a good example of this and you have the sort of custard coloured lume on the indices and in the hands, contrast that with the matte black dial and the red Submariner text. It's just a recipe for success. If you find an example that is as sharp as this, then you're absolutely winning. I think that's an all-time, timeless design and works brilliantly on the bracelet or on a NATO or on a Saffiano, whatever you want to put it on. It's just a winner. A really, really great watch. And of course, if you're in one of those moods where you just want to treat yourself and have something that is investment quality, absolutely all-time great Rolex. Now, this is a 6263 Daytona. And previously, we've had the alternative dial, that sort of inverted panda. This example is matte black with the white subdials, and it doesn't have the big red text on it, which actually I quite like. You've just got that monochromatic, straightforward complication, and it's just timeless. You have the screw down pushers, you have a manual wind caliber, effortlessly cool. It doesn't matter who you are or what you're wearing, there's always an excuse to wear that. And I think, well, it's top 5 watch of all time. It's just brilliant. The last watch I'm going to talk about is a bit of a wild card, if I'm totally honest. This is a Czapek Prototype watch. So this is something that when the brand was thinking about where the design direction is going to go, they would put together fairly rudimentary examples of watches to see if they work aesthetically and mechanically. So they would produce these watches that are fairly unfinished. The dial feels half-baked. The fonts are slightly different. The colours are somewhat unfinished. The case is, well, it's not the level of finish that you would expect from Czapek. Czapek are known for sports watches like the Antarctique, which are a significant step on from your Rolexes and Tudors and IWCs in terms of finish. But when you look at this watch, it feels slightly below that level. And I really like that. It feels like someone's design thoughts just put into metal, taken from a computer screen and put into a physical form. Even the movement is completely unfinished. I don't see any beveling. I don't see any Geneva stripes. I can only see a couple of jewels in there. And I think that's fascinating. If you're a Czapek aficionado, then this is a really interesting watch to have in your collection. The watch itself comes with a letter that explains that it's a prototype. So you have that provenance. But this is the origin story for a brand that went on to produce some really, really interesting watches. So I think from a collectability perspective, it's actually really impressive. Super cool watch and a bit of a wild card, but one that you definitely don't see hitting the market every day. So that's this week's drop. And I've just scratched the surface on what is one of the biggest drops we've ever had at Subdial. Go and hit the site, check them all out. I'll see you next week.